we're talking about the Donald Trump sexual stuff and all the women that are coming out. Well, you would think that everybody would be repulsed by it, but Eric Byler, who is a correspondent for this network, was in Panama City, Florida, where Donald Trump was, and we're going to find out that not every single person that Donald Trump has, come in contact with repulses everyone who watches Donald Trump.
It's locker room words, just like you get from the sports figures in the locker room. That's no different talk. All men do it and women do it. Clinton is a criminal. She needs to be in prison. All of her following, Paul Ryan, Soros.
Why does Paul Ryan have to go to prison?
Paul Ryan is part of the whole cabal. He's involved in all of it.
But it's not against the law.
He helped set Trump up with the tape.
Paul Ryan?
Yes.
Let me ask you this: when he said that, he was a Democrat. He's opened his eyes. Now he's a Republican. He's sorry for it.
Okay.
It does not bother me that he said that. I do not think that women should be sexually assaulted in any shape, form, or fashion. They should be respected, period. But with that said, some women live off the zippers of rich men. So therefore, if you put yourself in that position, there's no telling what you're going to get,
He apologized, and people should accept his apology because that's just kind of standard. It's just the rules always seem to be different for Donald Trump. So I would just drop the subject and just move on and, hope that nothing else comes out.
Is there anything that you could imagine hearing from him that would make you reconsider your support?
No.
I don't believe that last woman. It's like there was a degree of normalcy to her that suggests that there probably is something to come out that would make her reconsider.
Well, I would hope so. Yeah. What if he said, okay, I'm going to murder you tomorrow?
Right.
Okay.
Well, as Donald Trump said,
he was a Democrat when he made that threat.
That was my favorite. As Donald Trump said, that you can go out he could go out into the middle of Fifth Avenue and people would still support it. Shoot somebody. And
Somebody on one of our YouTube videos left a very good comment. Yes, that happens. Where he said, well, he made that famous comment about shooting someone on Fifth Avenue.
Yeah.
Apparently, he can go out and rape someone on Fifth Avenue, and they would still support him.
Yeah.
Or at least commit sexual assault in the middle of Fifth Avenue, and they would still support him.
Yeah.
And so, and you get that sense from here. Look,
that's what's so discouraging about hearing these voices too. And you can go to TYT Politics. It's about 5 minutes of Eric Byler's piece. There are more people if that wasn't enough for you. And it's to me, it's that's what you're up against constantly.
I love those. Wait, what? Why should Paul Ryan go?
That's
Well, I do actually want to talk about that because I think that actually is very relevant politically. So, as Michael said, youtube.com/TYT Politics, that's where you're going to find the longer version of that clip and many others like it. But so I think sending Hillary Clinton to prison is much more dangerous talk than even the Donald Trump tapes and the grabbing the genitalia. That sense of entitlement and sexual assault is obviously a giant, giant problem. But if we turn into a banana republic where we arrest our political opponents, that's perhaps an even bigger problem, and they all think that. I mean, in every rally, they're chanting, lock her up, lock her up. That is lock her up talk. Okay, anyway, but the Paul Ryan one is the most politically relevant. So Trump attacked Paul Ryan for not fully supporting him. Oh, that's it. I mean, the Republicans, I think, are in bigger trouble than they realize.
Totally.
So if these guys now go and vote for Trump and do not vote down ballot because they're mad at now they think Paul Ryan is part of the Hillary Clinton conspiracy.
Yeah.
That is the Republican Speaker of the House. And is total right-winger.
Cenk, I was at a Trump rally, and we'll move on just quickly. I was at a Trump rally in Janesville, Wisconsin, which is where Ryan is from. That's the area he represents. It was a Trump rally. Trump brought up Paul Ryan's name, and there were a few thousand people in there and thousands of people outside listening, and the whole place booed. And Trump, who knew that was going to happen, I think, said, wow. He actually seemed surprised. He played it pretty well. I didn't think I was going to get that reaction here. In his backyard, this is Paul Ryan's district, and they're booing him. So, Cenk, you're 100% right. That's going to be a major problem that's not going to go away on November 8th for the Republicans.
So already, generic question of do you prefer Democrats or Republicans to run the House? The Democrats have picked up 4 points. They went from up 3 to up 7 after the tapes, which is a big, big move. But not only that, that doesn't even take into account that people say, oh, no, I'd rather have Republicans, but who aren't going to go vote now because they're dispirited, or they're going to go vote for Trump, but they're mad at the Paul Ryans of the world and not going to vote for Republicans down ticket. The Republicans might actually have a bloodbath on their hands. There's so much more Young Turks content if you're a member. Great shows like Aggressive Progressives, Old School, you'll get post games, all ad-free, plus the whole 2-hour show. I know what you're thinking.
This is huge.
And it kind of is. So come join us. TYTnetwork.com/join.